Welcome to In the Flow, where we explore how marketing leaders leverage operations to eliminate chaos and capture opportunity. I'm Anthony Welgemoed, CEO of Ziflow. Today's guest is Nish Patel, host of the Creative Ops and Prompting Humans podcast. Nish is a serial entrepreneur with multiple exits in SaaS, marketing communications, and data analytics. I've known Nish since 2010, back when he was CEO of ConceptShare and I was CTO at Proof HQ. Our companies were, let's say, fiercely friendly competitors in the online proofing space. It's been fascinating to watch Nish's journey since then, and I'm excited to dig into his insights on the evolution of creative operations, leadership, and the future of in-house creative teams. Nish, welcome to the series.
And thanks so much for inviting me on. I'm excited for today's conversation. And it was a fiercely friendly competition. And you and the team at Proof HQ did a wonderful job. I have no issues with saying you guys ran laps around us, but we held our own.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because on the other side of the table, we were sitting there when Concept Share we were doing its new releases, and we were like, "Oh wow, this is impressive! It looks really good. Loved your UX." So you might say that, but we thought you guys were doing something really great as well at the time.
I appreciate that, and I take zero credit for that. It was the three original co-founders, and one of whom Bernie was and is still brilliant at user experience. And as you and I both know, the right user experience is critical to making any technology valuable to the end user and the organization. You're certainly showing that these days with what you and your team have done with Ziflow.
That's great. So one thing as we were looking at doing this or having this discussion, always think back to those concept share days where you came up with this creative operations model. If I got that right, it was a COM, and it was the first time I sort of heard of creative operations. And yeah, I'd love to just hear your thoughts around that. I mean, that was pretty insightful back then, and I thought that was a leap at the time.
Yeah, and again, I can't really take credit for it. Like creative operations today, there's thousands of people on LinkedIn with that title, but back then, what was it, 2012 or so? The title just started to pop up in a couple of places on LinkedIn, and one of our clients was Macy's, and there was this gentleman named Mike Monroe who had come into the organization in the role of VP of Creative Operations, and I had a chance to sit down with Mike in New York City, and creative operations sounded like one of those made up Silicon Valley titles. So I sat down with Mike, and the first thing I asked him, I said, Mike, this title, creative operations, did you make this up because it sounds cool? Like, tell me what it's all about. And then we had this great conversation about the need to bring supply chain thinking and models to the world of creative production. Because what Macy's and others were starting to realize, and is sort of like default thinking and understanding today, is that the volume of creative that was going to be required to push out through the growing number of channels available in response to the ability to capture and react to data in real time in terms of how campaigns were performing was going to require a different sort of sophistication in how creative was produced, both at the scale and the speed of it, and the quality of it at the same time as well. So it was sort of this growing set of complex issues that other industries like the auto industry that, grew from single factories to these global supply chains, that sort of same thinking and need was starting to come into the creative world. And this idea of creative operations as a function, a profession, a strategic need for organizations that really wanted to be able to execute at scale and speed and quality was going to be needed. And that's where both of our companies started to root in, was with this burgeoning community of people that weren't approaching it as project management, but really more as a strategic systems thinking type of role.
Yeah, that makes sense because ultimately, yeah, if you need to scale that creative output, you need something that's repeatable, something that works, and you can maintain that quality. And I think that's really important. So let's imagine, we've got a CMO and they're looking at their operations, their creative or marketing operations. What do you see that they get wrong, or what could they do better today?
I think a lot of CMOs are still unaware of the value, the strategic value that creative operations can have. That role in most organizations grows out of, I would say, a project management mindset where they're really sort of focused on, we just need to get done today what we need to get done. And I would say the smart, forward thinking, more strategic CMOs think of creative operations less about the tactical, but the role of creative operations is designing the system, that supply chain, if you will, so that they are able to be intelligent about how they achieve scale, speed, and at the same time, quality as well. So their directives to creative operations leaders is usually creative operations is a system that you should think of as a product. And your job is to build this product of people, process, technologies to achieve the outcomes we need in terms of, do we need to scale content? Do we need to go faster? Or increasingly these days, do we need to actually create more time and space so that people can engage in, I heard this great term last year, slow creative, so that while we're scaling content, we're also giving our creative teams the time and the space to think about, what are tomorrow's stories? What is tomorrow's great content that we're going to produce to break through what is increasingly a growing amount of noise out in the market that audiences are increasingly tuning out. So they think that systems versus tactical project management.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, I still, hear, or, if I talk to prospects or customers, it still feels like there's this divide between the creative team and it's two teams, operations and creative. It's not creative operations. Is that something you still see, and how do they sort of deal with that?
I still do see it. I'm starting to see more of an understanding from creative directors of the value of having a really strong operations partner, almost that creative operations leader is their chief operating officer. So if the chief creative director is a CEO of creative within a brand, or in an agency, then their creative operations leader is their chief operating officer. They're enabling the ability for great creative to happen. So I think what frustrates a lot of creative directors is they understand the need for scale and speed, and that increasingly a lot of that work is gonna get, a little bit templatized and things like that. And by partnering with really good creative operations leaders who have more that systems thinking mindset, what they will get back is that time that they crave, that time for creative thinking, that time for that blank canvas thinking, because that's where creatives shine. A couple of other points on that is, I think one is what's happened over the last 10, 15 years as we've all been in service of the algorithms increasingly, is that what creative work is has gotten confused. It's sort of this like big gray area now. And we put that sort of creative templatization, creative automation work, paint by numbers work, as I call it, or what I'm calling it these days, machine creative work, where you could almost do it step by step by step. We've confused that with what I call whole human or blank canvas creative. And good creative directors understand a really good creative operations leader is going to help them separate that. So that creative operations leader should be doing two things, I believe. Thinking about both like scale workflows, where you've got more machine creative, and storytelling workflows, where you are giving the creative director and their team back more of that blank canvas thinking time. And then two is creative operations leaders, and this is something the CMO should also be thinking about as, what is the role of creative operations when it's strategic and not tactical? It is, they are proactively, as part of building that creative operations system as a product, thinking about the creative culture and partnering with the creative director of, how are we creating the right creative culture? And that's not just about like producing creative content. It's also about like, how is the way that we do creativity within the creative team? How does that start to become the way we do it across the organization? I think that's a huge untapped opportunity, and really good creative operations leaders partnered with good CMOs who understand the value and partnered with great creative directors. Like if those three understand that, that is an organization that can have its cake and eat it too. It can scale, it could go at speed, it could work cost efficiently, it could, get closer to the marketing funnel in terms of impact, and it can really activate and harness at scale a great creative culture.
Yeah, I think you're right there because it ultimately gives them more time to do the creative work, the slow creative, if you will, thinking about the stories, thinking about how you can emotionally connect with customers and your audience. So something I thought about is I've not come across it, and maybe you have, but if you think where there's big scale within these agencies, they've got large creative teams doing various different types of campaigns and so on. The operations teams always sit separate from that creative team. And I wonder if there's an opportunity to actually bring them in and make them part of the team so it doesn't feel like a us versus them situation.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, you're almost talking about like decentralizing operations, right? So it's more embedded into the day to day. Well, I guess creative is also like that, right? Like creative happens over here in the corner, and then operations happens over here, and marketing happens over here. I mean, it's classic organizational silo issues,
Mm.
right? Everyone is sort of stuck in their little box. And what I'm starting to see increasingly, and I do think AI is going to be an accelerant to this, is that we are going to see a great decentralization. One thing I've been helping some teams and organizations do is just create almost like AI bots, if you will. So it's almost like your project management resource that can just be with you all the time. So that project management team's ability to show up scales. You don't necessarily need the humans everywhere. The skill set or the capability or the questions and answers can show up through in project management AI bot, if you will. But then the humans can step in to do the human work, to work through the difficult conversations as well. And that sort of goes back to culture. While we are moving into this world of being able to leverage more technology, automation, AI, whatever have you, to be able to move, much more quickly, to be able to scale at speed almost with, the push of a button. The messiness of humans will still remain. And what I'm excited about, to your point, the question you asked is, can we start to leverage these technologies so that administrative bureaucratic work can almost be taken care of in the background? And then it allows the creative operations leaders, the resource managers, project managers on their team to do the human work of gathering the people around and creating understanding of what are we trying to achieve and why, so they can understand how each individual person on the team is wired and figure out what's the right combination of people for this project so that we can maximize success. Or as they start to understand people, they'll go, well, Nish is wired this way. So we do have a process, but he's not going to follow it. Let's figure Nish out and figure out how we can maybe adapt the process to get the most out of Nish. So I also think we're moving into a world where today we're trying to fit teams and humans into the process. And I think what we might be moving into in the coming years is the process will be much more fluid and dynamic to fit the humans and their unique personalities.
Very cool. That would be quite interesting to see how that gets rolled out. And that actually brings me to another point. Something I know you've discussed before, and I've heard sort of moving around is this concept of a creative engineer. And I'd love to get your, what's your definition of a creative engineer, and how does that fit in with creative operations or just creative teams?
Yeah, it is a term that is popping up more and more. I think right now, sort of the consensus definition is somebody who is taking existing or emerging technologies, and figuring out how the organization is going to use it to be able to automate some portion of scale or speed, do it in a way that's brand compliant. I think we're going to see more of this type of role as these AI tools start to come into creative teams, more at the bottom of the funnel, if you will, for more of that like transactional creative work to again push into all the online platforms. I'm not seeing it yet play a role in that sort of blank canvas storytelling. Part of the process, but certainly for enabling scale and speed. And I see it as somebody that is going to be able to use these increasingly sophisticated tools to produce creative work at scale. And who knows what the future is going to look like? None of us has a crystal ball, but I've got this image of the creative engineer will use these tools, and increasingly there'll be AI tools to be able to produce creative work at scale, at speed, and cost efficiently. And those will almost be like Lego blocks of creative work that will be brand compliant and things like that. And I can imagine a creative engineer will heavily partner with a tool like Ziflow to make sure that everything meets brand standards and compliance standards and things like that, and integrate humans in the loop as maybe be required, whether that's somebody on the creative team or somebody on the legal team. But then the output of that is all these creative Lego blocks. And I think the great storytellers of tomorrow, the image I have in my mind is like Neo in the Matrix. And remember that scene where in the first Matrix, because the other two almost shouldn't exist, but that scene where he finally plugs in and there's all this data like just streaming past him, and I see the great storytellers of tomorrow being able to work in a way where they're able to take these creative Lego blocks and put them together in ways that tell the stories of tomorrow that will break through the noise and create that emotional connection and drive that activity that they're looking to drive with that individual or with that audience.
I totally agree, and it's going to be interesting to see how AI tools are being leveraged and used and implemented, and who uses it. How much of the creative team is actually using AI to generate the content versus it is prompting or almost like coding, if you will, to get the output. And then do you have like your equivalent of UX designers who design or sort of tell the stories and take that, and then you have a team that actually just does the implementation, the execution, and they're the experts at the tools to generate that content a lot faster. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, output is one thing, and that's going to be important because there's a never ending appetite for more and more content. But output isn't storytelling. And ultimately, that's what moves marketing and brands forward. It's storytelling, it's not output. And you and I have both seen the data over the last few years. Audiences are just tuning content out because it's just stuff for the sake of more stuff. I think what's going to end up happening is there's this term I've been playing with lately, content obesity, where I
Interesting.
think it's become so easy to produce content. And this isn't an AI thing, it's just become easier and easier over the last 10 years to produce content, to stuff into the channels. And the data is now saying that the host body, the audience, is getting full. And in fact, it's probably had a heart attack, we just haven't realized it. A series of those mini heart attacks, because the data is telling us they're increasingly tuning this out. So, I think what's gonna happen is we're going to end up creating so much content through these AI easy buttons that the data is just gonna make it very obvious there is a heart attack going on. I think what's been happening over the last 10 years is that this increasing amount of content has sort of dropped off, increasing amounts of, like, plaque into the marketing arteries. God, this is getting, dark.
All I can think of is we need an Ozempic for all this content we're generating.
Well, that's funny because AI in many ways, like, people are treating it like Ozempic, right? Instead of doing the hard work of, like, how do we create tomorrow's stories? How do we deal with the pain of the blank canvas? It's, "No, let's take the Ozempic and press the easy button." But I
Mm.
think it's gonna push content to the point where there's gonna be no choice but to go back to storytelling, and we're gonna have to do both, and how those 2 play, scale and storytelling, is going to be what great creative operations leaders partnering with great CMOs and great creative directors are going to have to figure out together, because ultimately, sure, advantages might be in distribution and data and things like that, but one of the most, perpetual advantages is brand. And brand is not a logo, brand is story. Like, can you create an emotional connection? Because customers don't buy on, oh, that creative is like, technically very good, which we're going to be able to do with AI, like massive amounts of technically 100% correct output. But it's stories that move humans. So it's going to have to be both.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's the people behind it all. I think, you know, probably the same for you, but as we build Proof HQ and Ziflow, I think always think about, okay, how do you build a stronger brand and how do you become more prevalent, create more awareness. But I think ultimately there needs to be personality behind it, and then the stories come from it. And obviously a Coca-Cola brand is beyond that. Even it's got like a lot of emotional connections. I always love that story about their creative director, early 1900s, I think he said, I want you to design a bottle that if someone drops it on the ground and it shatters, that they can say that is a Coca-Cola bottle. And to me,
Oh,
that was
that's amazing.
just that's so smart. Yeah, that's next level thinking and next level brand. I mean, that's sort of beyond the founder stories and so on. It's like, that's a real connection with people. And it's hard to come up with that stuff. And AI, I just don't think we'll be able to do that for quite some time.
No, it doesn't, because AI is great at, like, scaling and automating and optimizing what we did yesterday, but it has no sense of tomorrow, and most importantly, and this is why I'm excited about AI, I love using these tools for myself and my own productivity, but I also love using it as a thinking partner because it is humans who are irrational. We have a sense of originality. We have a sense of tomorrow. Like, that's why I find the fear narrative these days, I understand it, but just look beyond that, because beyond that is, oh, all the boring work that I'm doing, it could get outsourced, both in my professional and personal lives. And if I have the will, I can more readily apply my own curiosity, creativity, and sort of treat every day as a blank canvas. But I do want to go back to one thing and sort of bringing it back to our shared history in online proofing. What I still love about online proofing is that it's still rooted in efficiency, like making the review and approval process more efficient. And it's also rooted in compliance, making sure things are on brand and things like that. But when you think about, like, the 10, 20 years both you and I have been in and around the business, I think back in the late, you know, 2009 and all the way to, I would say relatively recently, review and approval was about driving just efficiency through the process for the sake of efficiency and compliance, and those things matter and they're important. But what I'm excited about these days is like the ability for tools like Ziflow to go, we're driving efficiency, and now you can reinvest that into storytelling because you guys have a lot of data and you're able to make your clients smarter about, oh, this type of feedback is constantly coming up, and that's an upstream problem that you could probably fix, you know, at your creative brief stage. Brands increasingly are looking for that. Like, help us with our process so we could be efficient, not just after we've created something, but is the data indicating a problem we have with our process upstream? And again, great creative operations leaders will welcome that information. And then I also think our relationship with speed has changed. And I see this with, you know, the review and approval process where it just used to be about we need to get through the review and approval process as quickly as possible. And that's good. And for that transactional creative or that machine creative, that bottom of funnel creative, speed is still job number one. It's like this thing has already been vetted. We're just doing a variation of this, an iteration. It just needs to meet all the brand guidelines. Speed is all that matters. But I think there's now an opportunity in the review and approval process to actually interject and tell the humans, like, oh, you might want to take a bit more time. Like, it isn't just a like review and approve it. It's going back to that notion of slow creative. Well, maybe we also need slow feedback sometimes saying, hey, somebody who's like made something. This is maybe for a new campaign, a product we're launching, or something like that. Don't just simply, approve or not, or just give like quick feedback just so it's off your task list. I think there's an opportunity to interject and go, you might want to be a little bit slower and take some time to absorb this and consider your feedback.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Nish. I think we see it with our own creative that we work on, and sometimes you take a pause, and we haven't done this now with AI yet internally, but you have a piece of creative and you go like, "Oh, it's just way off," and you almost need to restart. But you can see it in the comments, it's like as a human, you can read the comments, you can see it's sort of not there, it's not hitting the mark. And if we can start interpreting that, that'd be great. But the other thing, I mean, we had a sort of an exec meeting back in 2021 in London, and we used that the brand storybook, and it's all about how the movie plots work. There's a hero, there's a villain, and there's the whole story around it. And we were like, okay, who's the hero? Who's the villain in the story? And you as the company should never be the hero. Your customer is, but then who's the villain? And then you're helping. And we were talking about, okay, who's the villain in this? And it can't be a concept. It can't be something like deadlines. So we actually came up with the villain is the reviewer, because you're trying to get all the scattered feedback, make sense of it, and so on. And I think as we're using AI more and more, making sense of this feedback's great. But the other key part of the process was like, okay, what is the risk? And, everyone often thinks, okay, it's something going out to market that's incorrect. And it doesn't happen that often. We scour the internet for things that go wrong, a misspelt word and so on. But it just doesn't actually happen that often. But for me, the risk is that creative time. And it's, your creatives getting frustrated with the mixed feedback or the unclear feedback or not having enough time for creating and the storytelling and really putting in the effort. And to me, that is still the ultimate big risk. So yeah, getting it through quickly, you're right. It's nice, especially if that's how you operate it. Maybe you're an agency, got 3 iterations, needs to get out. But if you're a brand and you are trying to tell a real story and connect with humans, the more time you have for creative, just the more value I think you'll create from that.
Yeah, and I think that's happened over the last 10, 20 years is we've confused being right, like factually right. It's on brand, it's the right spelling and everything like that with good creative. And it's just like, no, it's a part of it, but it's gotten conflated, I think, right? And we live in a media landscape where you have to make a pretty big mistake for that to be sustainable, like a sustainable mistake that you're gonna regret, for more than a week. So, yeah, I think we've confused ourselves with efficiency for the sake of efficiency, um, and, 100% correctness for the sake of 100% correctness, when in fact, you're right, it is a storytelling. It is a great creative work.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a couple of AI tools come about where they're going to be checking your content for brands. So they're going to make sure it's 100% brand compliant, etc. And to date, I mean, they really struggle to gain traction. When we talk to customers and so on, brand compliance comes up, but it is still the efficiency bit, that is. But being 100% on brand, they let things slide, and these are large brands. Some of the largest ones. They let things slide in social media quite a bit. They let the social media team go off piste a bit, but yeah, they definitely need a bit of leeway through the process.
I think brand is like one of those things that everybody talks about, in terms of brand compliance and things like that. But if you ask most CMO, I mean, I don't want to name names, but like a CRM company with like orange branding, you go to their website and I can find microsites and lots of like key pages that are off brand, full stop, because it's about speed. Ultimately, what they're gonna look at is like the funnel. They're gonna look at the data, what's working, what's not working. And sure, it may not be on brand or it was our brand, 2 iterations ago, but what are we trying to do? Like even in the feedback process now, and I'm personally excited to see what you guys are gonna do over the coming years because,
Me too.
it like, even when somebody's giving feedback, when you and I started, it was really about, like, looking at something and the human being 100% responsible for going, "Is that on brand or not? Is it factually incorrect?" And having to make a lot of, like, subjective decisions, right? Um, and quite frankly, as somebody who, barely graduated high school and failed grade 9 art, I'm not the guy who should be making subjective decisions on, maybe we can make it purple." One idea I've been, intrigued by, and I don't know if you folks already do this or may do it in the future, is almost the idea of like a feedback therapist. When somebody is reviewing something, a review and approval system can surface data going, well, here's how this has been performing. And what we're looking to do is make changes to move the needle on that campaign so that data could provide some guidance and insight instead of just relying on, I think, I feel. Um, and then also when it's more sort of subjective, again, having that feedback therapist, it's almost like a creative therapist who understands and is internalized like the company's story, their why. They know, like
Yes.
you think about Coke, here's why our bottles are made the way that they're made, right? And it could act as a partner to the human through the feedback process. So the feedback, especially for that non-transactional creative, the human can get better at providing feedback because now they have this probably an AI-enabled feedback therapist or feedback partner that just has all this data and context and information that it could interject, like, right then and there.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I know there's some tools that are trying to do it, especially with video and is it a social video for travel? And then you need a human to appear in the first 3 seconds with a smile on their face, things like that. So it'd be really interesting to see where this goes. I did want to ask you, I mean, we both have been in online proofing and I know you're not in it day to day as such, but I mean, it's something you know super well. The one thing I still struggle with, 20 years on plus, is when someone asks like, "Hey, what do you guys do?" And you're like, "Okay, well, have you heard of online proofing?" And it's like, "No, is it like Grammarly?" Or people go like, "Do you review text or do you review the content?" Have you found a way to just very succinctly explain to me? Because proofing comes from, we both know, from the old days and print and plates and all that stuff, and we sort of adapted the word proofing and put in online proofing at the front, so we know the history of it. But I find like there's a lot of people who just, it's really foreign to them.
Yeah, it is shocking that lots of people still don't know about it, right? We tend to get tunnel vision in the worlds that we inhabit and live in. I used to facetiously joke around and say what we did was we made it easy to draw circles and arrows on images and videos.
Which is what,
And
what we do, right? So yeah.
exactly, it's what we do. But in terms of like what is the Instagram post to explain it, like what is the meme? I think for me, it's just stating, does your opinion matter before marketing content, before creative content goes out? And if the answer is yes, then an online proofing tool makes it easy for you to express your opinion. And I wouldn't, but if I were to start another online proofing company today,
Niche, never say never, because we
down.
said never.
Yeah, and you guys are doing a even better job the second time around, if I can say. But yeah, that's the way I would think about it as sort of the ethos and the explanation to others is we make it easy for you to express your point of view that's needed on creative or content in general that the organization is going to put out into the world. And that's why, when I think about things like a feedback therapist or can we start to stream data in, like when you and I started way back when, we were never thinking about pulling in the marketing data, right, as context or during the feedback process. But in today's world, as the ability and really the need to react and iterate on creative based on how a campaign is performing that you put out this morning and you've got data streaming in literally hours later, it probably makes sense. And that goes back to making it easy to express your opinion. If it's a data-informed opinion, I think my opinion is gonna be more valuable, during that review and approval process. If it's, again, on something that's more blank canvas work or concepting work, the ability to have that feedback therapist not pull in data, but really act as, sort of a, creative partner to me, somebody who may not be innately creative in the classical sense, I think would also allow me to effectively express my opinion in a way that's valuable to the process.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I do want to ask you just back to creative operations and efficiency. Again, it's just, I sort of call it a leaky bucket because I find like through this process, it's not like one specific area can say you are losing time here or there's wastage here in the process. It feels like it's in many different places. How did you sort of experience it, or how would you sort of communicate that? Because again, I still get this quite often from, with meet prospects or people who weren't really that aware of online proofing, and they're like, okay, but how do you make us more efficient? And we talk about all the different things you can do and so on. But how do you view that?
I think for me, it's a couple of things. I think one of the most effective ways is let's do an analysis of your inbox. Let's go and look at some of those threads of the feedback back and forth. Because if they're not using a tool like Ziflow, it's usually email, right? Or something like Confluence and things like that. So I think taking all that data and just doing an analysis on it, it's pretty jarring for people to see that going like, "Oh my god." So it's not even about like, "Oh, we might put a mistake into the world," because just like we don't think about, like, the food we're eating until the heart attack shows up, even though we all go for our annual physical, I think it's the same thing there. It's like, "Oh, until it happens, it's not a problem. It's a make-believe thing." But being able to keep their own data and their own lived experience in their inbox or, whatever other tool they're hacking together for review and approval, I think that has always, for me, been the most effective way of highlighting you do have a whole bunch of leaks in the boat. You're just not seeing them, but it is going to catch up to you. And I think the other thing is what I'm seeing really good creative operations leaders do is I'm probably too old to use a term like this, but like doing these listening tours. And what I encourage them to ask is not the quantitative questions, but the qualitative. Like, what is frustrating you? Like, I would ask somebody on the creative team, what is feedback that you're getting that is just frustrating you? And I would ask people who need to give feedback, what do you find frustrating about this process? I find review and approval is sort of like the creative briefing process as well. They're probably the
Yeah.
two biggest banes of like existence when it comes to that day-to-day creative process. And I am always shocked by just the lack of seeing the problem for what it is and how easy it is to solve for both of those things. Because ultimately, it comes down to people have not thought through the system. And by that, I don't mean, oh, we just need to go out and buy tech. Before they buy tech, it's like, how do we want the creative briefing process to actually work? Like, what is the output we want from this? And what does everyone involved in the process need from it? And then from the review and approval process, most people haven't really stepped back to think about like, what is the output we want from
Mm.
this? And what does everyone involved in it need? What do the creatives need? What do the marketers need? What do other business stakeholders need? And understanding that and what is the gap between how they want it to be and the way it is, and then go and find a tool that helps you enable the way you want to be.
Yeah, it's a bit like I sort of equate it to bug fixing. When I used to work with new engineers, they loved, everyone loves a greenfield project. It's, new project, there you go. But now the bugs start coming in. It's like, oh, it's something I've already done. I have to go refix it. And it's a bit like that. That review process is almost like a little QA process, if you will. And it's the two pieces in coding that people don't love doing so much. Nish, in 2 years, I mean, let's not go too far. We could do 5 years or whatever. But in 2 years, I mean, what is the landscape going to look like, you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. One of the issues in the creative operations world is that it is still, in general, way too rooted in the project management mindset. I feel like the profession hasn't done a good enough job of clearly communicating its strategic value, and it's sort of been pigeonholed. I think what we're going to start to see over the next 2, 3 years, and technology is going to be a big driver of this, is I think we're going to start to see creative operations is going to have to get much closer to marketing. Um, it is going to have to show its strategic value. So I think creative operations leaders today, and I use that term broadly and loosely, who are rooted in my job is to just move things forward today, tomorrow, the next day, project management mindset. Um, I think a lot of that work is going to get increasingly automated with technology. And I think those creative operations leaders who embrace this moment to streamline and automate through technology and really root themselves in that systems thinking, treating the creative operations system as a product where increasingly their job is about partnering with the creative director to create the right creative culture so that people can work together effectively, um, and they can produce what they need to from a creative point of view, whether that's scale, speed, cost efficiency, and great creative or some combination of that. But I think the next 2 years are going to be critical for creative operations. You and I know this because we live tech, but the changes that are starting to unfold and are coming. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say they are seismic, and anyone whose job, creative operations or otherwise, if they approach it as a tactical job, which I think of as basically pre-algorithm, they're going to have a huge issue.
Yeah, it's either, you sort of stay as you are, you'll be running at the same pace, but you're gonna get further and further behind. It's not about just keeping it's everyone's going quicker now and going faster in terms of the technology they use, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the ability, to your point of like everyone can go quicker, everyone can scale, go at speed, and be cost efficient. Well, that means that value is commoditized. It's generic. It's off the shelf. So, what is the value that you're going to create? And I did this presentation at a conference a few months back, and my message to that creative operations audience was AI is your biggest gift ever because everyone's trying to figure it out. And this is an opportunity to transition yourself from a tactical perception to a strategic one and embrace technology, specifically AI, as an opportunity to operate in a dramatically different way. And that's why I'm personally excited about it. I think not just for creative operations, but in general, I think
In
the
general, yeah.
opportunities that are getting unlocked are massive.
Yeah, totally agree. Nish, thank you so much. Appreciate it. It's really great.
Yeah, this was a blast, you know?
Yeah.
Let's do it again in 20 years and see if we're still, in and around
No, I
proofing.
think I think time is moving quicker and quicker. So it's sort of 20 years on. So the next one's got to be 5 years. Then it's going to be eventually we'll do it every week,
That's
if the
right.
pace keeps going. So
Right,
yeah.
that's right. Well, thanks so much, Ant. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, Nish. I'm sharing insights from around the marketing, tech, and operations industries on how marketing and creative teams can get more done together.